Good morning, Shmuel, the running tour guide, together with Dr. Tovia Book. We're in Qumran. Wow, what a sight, what a place. We've brought you here to show you off the beaten track sites around the caves behind us. 2,000 years ago, a community of Essenes, the Dead Sea sect, the Qumran sect, were dwelling here. They were scribes, they hid scrolls in caves, discovered in 1947 and studied ever since. Probably the most studied piece of antiquity that has ever been found on planet Earth from these caves behind us. But we're going to focus on subjects that sometimes most people do not experience visiting a site of Qumran. We're going to talk about Tefillin. We're going to talk about the dry waterfalls. We're going to talk about the landscape. We're going to talk about the rebirth of the land of Israel. But really just to give you a feel of a site so important to the Jewish people and to humanity at large. And also to show you how easy it is to come and visit a site like this living in the land of Israel. We left Modi'in this morning. 1 hour later, we're in the middle of the desert at a site where you can really feel the history and touch on subjects which really move the mind, move the heart, put us into action. So welcome to Qumran. What does this place mean to us today?
Okay, well, this site here is not just important for Jews as well. There was an interesting chap who lived in this community. His name was Yochanan the Mikveh Keeper, otherwise known as John the Baptist. And he was part of this community also, and he was Jesus's cousin. It's a huge site of tourism for Christian tourists and for mankind, because mankind is basically, the ethical moral code is based on the words of the prophets, and the oldest words of the prophets were recorded on scrolls. They were written here over 2 millennia ago. In fact, back to 1947, in this cave over here, where the first bunch of scrolls were found, there was a scroll, an Isaiah scroll from the book of Isaiah, written in the year 200 BCE. In other words, just a couple of centuries after Isaiah himself walked the earth, they found the scrolls. And what's incredible is they gave us a sense of continuity. So according to the Jewish law, when you're writing a Torah scroll, you need to copy a scroll before that, and then before that, and before that. Eventually go back to the original Torah. And suddenly, this is the first time they found scrolls dating back to over 2 millennia. Before these scrolls were found, just so you understand, the oldest scroll was 1,000 years old. We call the Aleppo Codex. So this absolutely shattered all of the records when it came to old scrolls, and made us understand that the scrolls we read today are more or less the same. So we have this sense of being a link in the chain of Jewish continuity.
Magnificent.
Imagine you've never seen these things before, tefillin or phylacteries in Greek. How strange they must look. I was once on a British Airlines flight, and a lady came up to me, not a member of the tribe. She saw that I had my yid lid on, and she said to me, my kippah, and said, I saw Rabbi, meaning a Jew with a beard, in front of the aeroplane, and he had leather straps on his arms and a transistor radio in his head. And that's how strange they must look. So the question is, how do we know? Why is it that observant Jews around the world for millennia have been putting on straps with boxes? How do we even know what we're wearing? How do we know what they are? All the Bible says, the Torah, is very simple. It says, V'shinamtan levanecha, you should teach it to your children, and ukshautam liot al yadecha, v'hayu l'tatafot bein yinecha. You should put them as a sign on your arm, and they should be as frontlets between your eyes. But how do you know what they is? How do you know it's a black box? How do you know it's black straps? How do you know it makes a design? And that, my friends, is because in addition to the written Torah, we also have an oral Torah, Torah Sheba'al Peh, that explains this. Next question is, how do we know what we're wearing today are the same tefillin that Jews wore 2,000 years ago? How do we know we had that link of Jewish continuity going on? And the answer is, till the late 1950s, we didn't know. We just assumed that's our tradition. And yet, what happened in this very spot changed our perception of tefillin. In the late 1950s, Yigal Yadin, who shot to fame a few years later in the early 60s when he excavated Masada, was digging here in Qumran, where we are right now, the site of the Essene community, the site of where the caves down here where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and up there, and he was looking for more Dead Sea Scrolls. In fact, there was a race. He was one of many teams scouring the caves of the Judean desert looking for Dead Sea Scrolls. Instead, what he found in a cave in Qumran was not Dead Sea Scrolls, but remains of a slightly later period, the time of the Bar Kokhba revolt. He found remains of Jews and their possessions from the 2nd century CE, the second great revolt against the Romans in the land of Israel. So the question is, what would you take with you if you were fleeing from a massive Roman force? What vital possessions would you take with you? Some people have taken legal documents with them. And he found some unusual things which you wouldn't expect people to grab when they're fleeing for their lives. One of the unusual things he found, which always amuses me, was he found one of the women had taken her entire makeup kit with. Eyeliner, perfume bottles, everything, because you got to look beautiful in a cave. And very poignantly, he also found a very small pair of tefillin, just like this. In fact, these were the oldest tefillin in the world, all the way from the time of the Mishnah, from the 2nd century. And because it's so dry out here in the desert, organic material that normally rots was perfectly preserved. Leather, parchment, sandals, wicker baskets, all this stuff was perfectly preserved. Now these tefillin were so small that he couldn't actually read them. He was curious to know, do we still have the same scrolls inside our tefillin that they used back then 2,000 years ago? So he took the tefillin, he packed them up, took them into a box and went on a train from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv to the police lab there, where you could do infrared photographs and to enlarge the parchment to see if it's the same tefillin. And he wasn't an observant man. He was sitting on the train, and a young Chabad Chassid was going around asking people if they put on their tefillin. You sometimes see them in New York, you see them at the Western Wall, all over the place. And he didn't normally put on tefillin, but he heard this guy had a strange accent. He said to him, "Hey, where are you from?" He said, "I'm from the Soviet Union." And the guy didn't said, "Well, tell me, did you put on tefillin when you were in the Soviet Union?" And the guy said, "Actually, yes, I did." And the guy didn't said, "What would have happened if the authorities would have caught you?" He said, "Well, I might have been put in prison or sent to Gulag, because it's forbidden to practice our religion openly." And Yadin said to him, after thinking, he said, "Listen, I don't normally put on tefillin, but out of respect of your bravery, the fact that you put them on the Soviet Union, I'll put on tefillin today for you." And he put on the tefillin, took them off, didn't think anything about it. As the train's putting into Tel Aviv, there was a woman who'd been watching this whole exchange sitting in the compartment, and she went up to him and said, "Professor Yadin, that guy didn't know who you are. I do. I know you're a famous archaeologist, I know you're a former chief of staff of the IDF, and I also know that you're a secular Jew. And when you put on those tefillin, it meant a lot to me, and I'd like to tell you why." Years later, he recorded this in his diary, this exchange, and he didn't quite know how to respond. He said, "Okay." And she said, "Listen, in 1956, just a few years ago, my husband was the only religious soldier in his paratrooper unit in the Sinai War, in the Sinai campaign. And there was an Egyptian machine gun nest threatening all of the soldiers, and he went up and single-handedly took it out, but he was mortally wounded. And as he lay dying, he said to his secular comrades, 'One wish,' and they told me this at the Shiva house, 'one thing I'd like you to do for me, and that's to put on tefillin in my memory.' And they told me this story at the Shiva house. And when I saw you today putting on this tefillin, it reminded me of my late husband and his last wish." And Yigal Yadin, who was an academic and not known for his emotional outbursts, was deeply moved. He said to the woman, "Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for your husband's bravery. And I think you should be the one to see what I have in this bag." And he opened his bag, took out the box and said, "This is the oldest pair of tefillin in the world," and showed her the tefillin that he just found in Qumran a few days earlier. And we are all now, every single morning when I put these tefillin on, I think I am part of that chain of Jewish continuity, stretching all the way back to when we were free and independent in our land, back to when we are again free and independent in our land. As if that pair of tefillin had been waiting for 2,000 years for a general of the new Jewish army to come back and say, "Am Yisrael Chai," the people of Israel live, because we follow our traditions, our community, and of our attachment to the land of Israel.
Thank you, Tovia. Running amongst the ruins of Qumran. Let's have a stop at the mikveh here. Here we are sitting at the entrance to a ritual bath, a mikveh from 2,000 years ago. Many were found here, I think over 27 mikvahot, which shows you that ritual purity was very important for the community of the Essenes that were living here. But we'd like to show a piece of history, a coin that'll connect us to this time period. how are you going to connect it to the site of Qumran?
Well, what's interesting about Qumran is that they lived a communal lifestyle. So when the people came here, they donated all of their money to the good of the community. Very similar to a kibbutz in early 20th century Israel today. And archaeologists, when they're excavating here, in addition to scroll fragments and various pots and pans, also found a hoard of coins. And amongst the coins they found was a coin from this time period, like the one I'm holding in my hands. It's a very special coin. It says on it in ancient Hebrew, Shanat Shtayim, and there's a picture of what looks like a little cup over here. And this was a cup, it's very similar to what the Levites washed the hands of the priests with in the temple. And the year 2 is referring to is the second year of the Great Revolt against the Roman oppressors. That broke out in the year 66 CE. So this coin was minted in 68, 2 years before the temple fell, and it is a bronze pruta. 10 of these were by a loaf of bread, and this was the coin used at the time. So what were the Jews fighting for? Let's look at the other side of the coin. And these coins were also used as propaganda. They're written with their old Hebrew. They were fighting for this. And this is what the coin very emotionally says. It says over here, in ancient Hebrew, Chet Resh Tav Cherut Tzadik Yud Vav Nun, Cherut Zion. They were fighting for the freedom of Zion, the freedom to practice their own religion and be in charge of their own destiny in their own country. And these coins lay buried in the ground for 2,000 years until they were discovered by representatives of the new Jewish people, almost as they've been waiting for them to be reclaimed. Because now we have the hope of 2,000 years, in the words of Israel's national anthem, Liot Am Choshi B'Artzenu, to be a free people in our land.
Wow. You know, there's so many thoughts to share at a place like this, but if we briefly talk about the period of the Essenes, you know, you had the division in the Jewish world with the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes that broke away from Jerusalem and settled in these hills. But it's kind of like a foreshadow or a blessing before the destruction, because all of these scrolls that were written down and hidden in these caves, you know, remained there for thousands of years, only to be discovered in modern times, 1947, at the brink of the birth of the state of Israel. And you know, here we are discussing a subject for the redemption of Jerusalem. Coins that were minted after the destruction of the temple and during this revolt against the Romans. You know, we're holding on to that concept of a return to Jerusalem, a redemption of the land. There's just no way you can come and do a trail hike here in the lowest place on earth and not get a dip in. Let's see, we're going to go deep. We're going to Jordan. We're going to swim across as far as we can. It's clear, it's crisp, it's not cold, but it's clean because there's no one here. Usually it's muddy with all the people going in with their feet and kicking up the sand. Look at these salt crystals. Beauty.
And that's why it's called Yam HaMelach in Hebrew, not the Dead Sea, but the Salt Sea. Look at that salt.
Exactly. Yam HaArava, Yam HaKedma, Yam HaMelach, the Salt Sea. And we're heading to, oh, how wonderful it is here on the lowest sea on the planet Earth. You can see Dr. Book has been working on his tan. Mighty white smile there. Wishing you all a Shabbat Shalom. Hope you enjoyed that vlog of the Dead Sea Cliffs. A little taste of Qumran. Peace out. See you soon. Promise to subscribe to the channel and we'll promise to take you to places you've never been before. Off the beaten track from the land. Get your camera too.
Of course, I should have brought the big camera.